Imagine you spent the past 20 years climbing up the corporate ladder and finally made it as the CEO. Can you do what you want? Join me as we delve deeper into today's topic together with Jean-Michel CHATAGNY, board member, Ageas Group, to learn more about the role and responsibilities of board members in insurance. Welcome to this podcast where we explore innovation and corporate training in the insurance and banking industries. I'm Philippe, co-founder of the Engage Institute. We empower your employees and clients thanks to engaging insurance training such as expert interviews. Understand better, sell more.
Today on the show, I have the great pleasure to welcome Jean-Michel CHATAGNY. Hi, Jean-Michel. How are you doing?
Hi, Philippe. I'm very well, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to a nice chat with you. Now, Jean-Michel, you've worked for over 40 years in the reinsurance industry, and you're now a non-executive board for Ageas, a Belgian company. So let's jump into that. First, what is Ageas?
Ageas is an international insurance company with a local touch, and it is focused in Europe and in Asia. The particularity compared to many other insurance groups around the world is that in Europe, with the exception of Turkey PNC and Portugal PNC, we have wholly owned subsidiaries, whereas in Asia, we have partnerships. And overall, we operate in 14 different countries.
And how many employees do you have around the world?
So Ageas is a Bell 20 company, so it's listed on the stock market. It has 47 million customers. We have 44,000 employees, revenues of about 16 billion euros. So it is among the top 20 insurance groups in Europe.
Sounds impressive. And if we go straight to you, your job is a non-executive board member. So I would like to know, what is that?
As you said, I spent a little over 40 years of my life in the reinsurance industry, and unusual in our days, all this time with one company, Swiss Re. I had the chance to work in different territories. In the UK, I spent 2 rounds in Hong Kong, as well as 11 years in Japan. So all in all, I've had the opportunity to work about half of my career life outside of Switzerland. And while I started on the technical sides, I've been looking after clients for the rest of my career. So why Ageas? When I decided to leave the firm and take an early retirement, took only a few months for the chairman of Ageas to call me and invite me to join the board as an independent, non-executive member of the board. And as I knew Ageas as a client while I was at Swiss Re, I knew their operation, I knew their management, I had great respect for the way they operate. I've accepted the position. So today I'm on the main board of the group in Brussels. I'm also part of the Risk and Capital Committee as well as the Remuneration Committee of the group. And I've also, since this year, joined the board of AG Insurance, which is the operating companies in Belgium. It is the company that was founded 199 years ago. So next year we'll celebrate the 200th anniversary. And Ageas as a company was only formed in the aftermath of the financial crisis.
So you said you're in a board in different committees, but what is a board? You have a CEO, you have a chief financial officer, you have all these people, they manage the company. Why would they need you?
That's a very good question. In essence, the corporate code of many countries make it an obligation for listed companies to have a board of directors. And usually the majority of those board members have to be non-executive and independent. That is a key criteria. So what does a board do? Very simply put, the board has 3 functions. First and foremost, it defines the strategy of the company. While the strategic objectives are formulated by the management, the board has to endorse it. The board has to challenge the strategy. And then the second very important criteria is to put in place a management that is efficient, that is ethical, and that is functioning. And the third element in a board function is to monitor monitor the progress of the company, monitor the way the management operates the company and delivers the result. Because we have to keep in mind that a board has responsibility for various stakeholders. For most companies, we have an obligation towards our customers. Then we have an obligation towards our employees, whose livelihood depend on the success of the company. And as I mentioned, Ageas employs 44,000 employees. Then we have an obligation towards the shareholders who provide us the capital to invest and to make sure that it is sustainable. And then finally, we have also an obligation towards society. Far more importantly, as an insurance company, we are cashing in premium and we have an obligation to pay claims. And if you simplify the role of an insurance company, is that customers pay us a premium so that we can fulfill a promise in the future, either in case of claim or in the case of life insurance or pension, to make sure that what you have invested, you get back as a customers years later.
So as a board, you ensure that the things are run properly, it's ethical. So by definition, it seems to me that you're not executive, you're not executing, you're checking the executive team. So why do you have to say non-executive board member?
That's exactly the point. We are not involved in the day-to-day management of the operations. That's the role of the executive committee. Within Ageas, we have a 5-member executive team comprising the chief executive officer, the CEO. We have the CFO, we have the CRO, and we have 2 managing directors, each in charge of a territory, one in Europe, one in Asia. So this team of people is in charge of operating the company. And as a non-executive independent board member, we are here to supervise it, supervise their operations, supervise their activities. But there are many other, I would say, roles that we play as board members. As an insurance company, we have a lot of supervision, we have a lot of regulations. That implies that we have a lot of guidelines. We have corporate governance guidelines, we have policies, we have transaction policies, risk policies, investment policies, transparency policies, money laundering policies, which is applicable to all employees of the company. And while those policies are developed by the management of the company, by the compliance officer, by the chief risk officer and the teams, the board has the responsibility to review those and approve them, because those policies are required by the regulator, in our case, which is the National Bank of Belgium.
But these are a lot of different areas where even if you've spent 40 years plus in the industry, you cannot have a deep knowledge in all of these areas. So how do you get the necessary information knowledge in order to fulfill your duties?
Well, that's a very good point. In essence, what we are looking for as a board is the diversity in experience and in capabilities. So we have a very diverse board. In the case of Ageas, there are 13 members of the board, 10 are independent non-executive, and 3 are by law the executive of the company, namely the chief executive officer, the chief financial officer, and the chief risk officer. And the board members do come from various experience. We have people who have banking experience. We have people who have investment experience. We have people who have research experience. And this collective experience makes it that the board can function and challenge while supporting the management in their activities. I don't pretend, having, as you said, spent all my career in reinsurance, I don't pretend having deep knowledge in everything. But I have sufficient knowledge in reinsurance, and reinsurance is one of the activities that Ageas does. I have experience in the M&A area, since Swiss Re has acquired and sold a number of companies. I've had experience in representative Swiss Re in the various board of the companies that they had while I was active there. Human resource experience, management, leadership, leading teams that operate in various territories. And all this experience makes it that we can share and challenge the operation of the company.
Right. There must be some topics where you're less comfortable. So how do you get trained, or do you get trained? Do you go back to the classroom?
Indeed, we do. There is a
You do.
requirement by the National Bank of Belgium. Yes, it's absolutely critical. So when you join the board, you have an induction course, which lasts usually 3-4 days, where you go through the various areas of the company. And we have discussions. We look at how the company functions. And we have also formal trainings. In our case, the recent training that we've had were in ESG. As you know, ESG is very, very important in the view of public, in the view of shareholders. And we do have ESG criteria in the objectives of the management.
Just for our viewers who are less used to this term ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance. So making
Yes.
sure that the company is well run. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Also, recently, with the introduction of the new accounting rule, IFRS 17, we had several sessions of formal training to clearly understand what the difference between the previous accounting system and IFRS are. And those are requirements by the National Bank of Belgium.
So how many hours of studying, how many days of courses do you have to take every year?
Well, on average, probably 3 to 5 days of courses, of trainings. Now we are also using some of the regular board sessions for training. We have typically 8 to 10 meetings of the main board scheduled per year. About half of those are physical, half of those are using the technology. Again, this is a point of ESG, making sure that we don't hop on planes all the time. We also have extraordinary board meeting, for example, in the case of M&A files, where we have short noticed, short boards of 1 to 2 hours schedules where we discuss potential acquisitions, where the board has to sign off on offers that we make. And we do spend once a year, 3 days together to review the strategy, to engage with the management of the operations, and to review their performance.
When I think about the board, there has been something in the news in Switzerland, for example, some big companies that might have an issue and go bankrupt, and the board members could have maybe acted upon. Do you have any liability on your case? Do you have a real stake, a real responsibility?
I would say we do. And this is an area which irritates me to a great extent when I see the failure of some companies, and Switzerland has a few examples where clearly the management has failed in setting the strategy. The board has failed in signing off the strategy, in monitoring the strategy. We have examples 2 decades ago in the airline industry. We have more recent examples in the banking industry. And what we see is that while there are investigations and the law is looking into it, there are no real consequences. Very often management gets away. And that's a point which really irritates me to a great extent. Why? Because if you think who are the owner of a publicly listed company, it's the shareholders. And by law, shareholders have to have a meeting once a year where they approve the accounts, where they approve any dividend if the company is flourishing, and while they also do discharge the management and the board. And in the case of company failure, you can see that in past years where the strategy was already put in question, shareholders have provided a discharge to the board. So it is very hard after that to go after board members' responsibilities for their failures. And I think going forward, shareholders should use their rights to scrutinize more and maybe to refuse discharging a board that is not functioning and fulfilling its duties.
Because normally as a shareholder in a big company, you just get a paper every year. Do you reconduct these people? Just sign here, yes. In many cases, if you're a small shareholder, you don't even know them, you say yes, and you send back the paper, you don't even answer. But that's what can lead to real issues in a group.
That is correct. But as a shareholder, I think you should also look at how the company operates. You have the financial press that reports on companies, company news. Most companies that are listed have to publish interim results, either quarterly or half yearly. So as a shareholder, you can really look at how the company is performing. And if a company doesn't perform, you should not accept the way the company operates.
So when you invest in a company, do you look at the people who are in the board?
Yes, as a private person, I do invest individually in companies. I'm a shareholder in a number of companies, Swiss companies, US companies, European companies. And yes, I do look at their annual reports. I look at who I'm going to vote for in their boards. And the key questions is to see, is it a board that is diversified enough? Is it a board that brings what it requires in terms of expertise to the company or not? Are there conflict of interest? And those are basic questions which, as an investor, you have to ask yourselves before you start investing in companies. Now, I'm not suggesting that I've always done things perfectly right.
I'm sure you have, Jean-Michel. I'm sure you have.
I've invested
Come
in
on.
companies that are flourishing, but there have also been a few flops.
Wow. Okay,
and-
lessons. So the board is the one that also elects a new CEO. So when you elect a new CEO, what kind of criteria do you look at?
That's a good question. The board will actually endorse recommendations in terms of the executive team, the CEO, the CFO, the CRO, as well as other board members. And why do I use the term endorse? Because essentially the search and the choice of those key positions is done by the governance and nomination committee. And then it is endorsed by the board.
But this committee is part of the board, or is a subset of the board, or is it completely different?
So this committee is a subset of the board. Basically, you have the main board, and we do have, in the case of Ageas, 4 committees. We have the Risk and Capital Committee, the Remuneration Committee, the Governance and Nomination Committee, and the Audit Committee. So those 4 committees are subset of the main board, and we have separate meetings. In my case, the Risk and Capital Committee takes place the day before the main board. So decisions and recommendations can be made during that meeting, and then they are presented to the main board.
So it is quite a substantial responsibility that you board members have in leading as you decide who the executive team will be and you confirm the strategy.
It is a substantial responsibility, and it is really fun to be at that level of supervisory functions in a company.
I have a little question for you, Jean-Michel. But how much are board members paid?
That is a good question. I would say we have a reasonable pay. It's representing the benchmark of the Belgian financial industry. And you have to keep in mind, remuneration of the board is also subject to approval by shareholders.
So back to the shareholders, they must take responsibility. We must take responsibility for our decisions, like democracy, basically. On another topic, Jean-Michel, technology with AI, ChatGPT, and the likes in the past month have really risen to the top of the news. Which technologies do you see will be the most impactful in the near future for you?
That is a very wide subject. Technology is at the core of our strategy, and it implies different areas. The first one, which we have been working since years and we still work, is how do we approach customers? How can we make the journey to buy insurance as simple as possible for customers? And technology plays a very important role. You know, the advertisement, the approach to customers, the onboarding of customers when they either go to a bank, because we work with bank distribution and customers will buy at banks, bank assurance, life insurance, and so forth. If you buy a house, the bank will provide the customers the mortgage, and to ensure that the mortgage gets repaid, the bank will also sell life insurance, which covers this mortgage in case of an event happening on the mortgage holder. So the journey of the customers into insurance is absolutely critical for us. We also invest a lot in systems, reporting systems, accounting systems, policyholder systems. So we've revamped a number of our IT systems in Belgium, in Portugal, and elsewhere. Now, we also test out other technologies, for example, in the pricing areas of motor insurance. Ageas is an important player in motor insurance. We've been looking at how can a driver behavior influence its premium in the future. We've been working, of course, with different technology partners, with universities into testing out devices that you put in cars that assess the behavior of the customers in order to define what sort of risks they represent for the company.
For example, you record the speed at which we drive, how dangerous we are in a way. This data is sent to your system, and we can get the discounts if we drive correctly.
That's the whole idea. So that the system will test also whether the driver drives in a sporty manner, quick acceleration, braking, and so forth. Indeed.
And do you see anything like disruptive, like the famous AI these days? Could it really take over plenty of jobs, make a big shift, not just an evolution, but a revolution in insurance? Could this be something in the near future?
I think the evolution of AI has been extremely rapid. And I do believe that some functions might be replaced in the future with AI, especially in repetitive job, you could replace it. Where I think we will also use AI is in research and development, in assessing the level of risks, where you need to amalgamate loads of data together. And those programs in artificial intelligence with algorithm will help us to be more precise in risk assessment and more precise in the pricing of those risks. That I'm convinced it will happen in the future.
What about an AI board member?
We do have one new board member who has a technology background. And
not an AI board member, like someone like artificial intelligence being a board member, like the company that supposedly has a CEO who's an AI.
I wouldn't rule out the possibility in the future. Indeed. But we already are well represented with people who have been leading technology companies in Germany in the automotive insurance industry. So with a lot of experience in these areas. And that does help. Because the technology is one thing. But we should remember ourselves that what is lagging is, I would say, legislation and the regulation around the use of the technology. And I think our politicians have realized the risk, but the politics is much too slow in assessing what pitfall, what downside of this new technology is, and to put a regulation around it does make sense.
And I see also one thing. I mean, there can be highly qualified politicians, lawmakers, etc. But technology is complex. So you might have a high level understanding of it, but to create laws, to understand all the implications, it's not something you can do within 6 months since the chat GPTs and the like have appeared. So they also have a high learning curve, I assume.
Absolutely. It's like the birth of internet. Internet is a fabulous thing. The very fact that we can conduct this interview using the technology is great. The fact that we have board meetings using the technology is great. Yet there are some peoples who are misusing the technology and commit criminal acts. Talking about artificial intelligence, if you think of a board meeting that lasts 7-8 hours during the day, a lot of discussions, by regulations, you have to take minutes of those meetings. And every company has loads of meetings. And we have a company secretary who has to capture the essence of what has been discussed, of what has been challenged, and the decisions that have been taken, and end up with meeting minutes that are usually 10, 15, 18 pages long. So it requires capabilities, and usually company secretaries are people that are highly skilled, highly trained, university grads, possibly, and better with a legal background. Now try to imagine that you insert ChatGPT in your Microsoft Teams application, and ChatGPT will capture the essence of the meeting and produce you meeting minutes. I am convinced it will happen, but looking at some tests that we've conducted using ChatGPT and some of the pitfalls and the errors that are in there, I think there is still a way to go until we can use the functionality in a proper way.
Interesting. Now, we talked a lot about ESG previously, and one important thing, climate change, our planet is burning. We see this summer. What about the impact on the environment? We all point the finger at flying around. So I have to ask you, all these top managers, you have to fly and visit the people, visit different offices around the world. One, are you still doing it? And if yes, how do you see this going on going forward?
I think the COVID pandemic has been a trigger which accelerated the change of behaviors of many corporations, because we were barred from traveling for many, many months. Probably even more than the questions around the climate. But definitely, the case of our company, we are very acutely aware of the impacts. And ESG is not simply a concept about which you talk and you publicize what you will be doing in the next 20 years. It's what you do today that counts. And indeed, as I mentioned before, we are still having face-to-face meetings because the face-to-face is important, but about half of our meetings are virtual using technology. I wasn't in the board before the pandemic. I've joined after, but my understanding is that most of the board meetings were physical one before. And during the pandemic, we've been 100% virtual for nearly a year and a half. And now, while we recognize the need to have still some face-to-face, we are using the technology for half of our meetings. We are using the technology for more than half of our meetings, if I count the short-term extraordinary board meetings that we have. About ESG, it is not only the traveling that counts. We spend a lot of time thinking about how can we develop products for customers that take into consideration those ESG criteria. When we talk about our investments, we are looking at what we do invest, and we have an investment policies where we clearly have declared the areas which we will not invest into. Coals, mining, tobacco industry, weapon producers, and so forth. I mean, the list is pretty long. There are also criteria about the countries in which you invest. If you have a countries that is not necessarily adapting and living by standards that we deem that are the minimum standards, we will not invest in those. So it is a journey that you're taking, but clearly we do take into consideration these criteria.
Jean-Michel, I appreciate very much our discussion, but we're nearing the end. I would like to ask you, is there any wish you have for the next years to come?
The first wish I would have is a little bit more stability in this world. We live in a world of uncertainty, disruptions. We've had to go through a pandemic, which has disrupted the lives of many people, the lives of organizations. We've had to adapt, and we've adapted, I think, pretty well. We live in a world where the geopolitical environment is very unstable. And as human beings, I think people aspire at having stability, having a job to feed their families. And that would be my wish, that we try to work out a world where people have a better life. Because if I see around us, I would say we are very fortunate in Europe, in many other countries, with the life which we have. But there are probably as many people who have really a tough life. You see the migration movement, you see the war-torn zones where essentially citizens and people are suffering. So that would be my biggest wish.
a bit of stability, I can join you on that. Jean-Michel, that was a great pleasure. Thank you very much for your time and for a nice discussion. And looking forward to catching up in the times to come. You take care.
You're most welcome, Philippe.
Cheers.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode, where we brought you some of the latest and greatest from the training, technology, and insurance worlds. Thanks for listening, and thanks to our guests for sharing their valuable insight with us. If you struggle to capture the knowledge of your experts, contact us. We'll record engaging interviews with them for you to share. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find us on YouTube or LinkedIn, where you can watch the full video of this interview and many others. This interview was made possible thanks to our colleagues Laura Servadio for the coordination of this interview and Patrice Séjalon for a powerful remote interview studio based on AI. Until next time, stay safe and stay insured. Cheers!